Jagatambe ma jai jai ma. 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 Jagatambe means the mother of the world or the mother of the universe. One of the many names for the goddess. And sometimes when we get into sort of the multitude of different names that we have for goddess or gods, one example I like to use is that we all have sort of different facets of us that come out at different times, right? So especially when we think of like the really fierce versions of the goddess, sometimes I like to think of a loving mother who reaches out and pulls a child by the arm out of the way of some danger, right? In that moment, that action might seem ferocious, but really it is about preserving that child from harm. And having just come back from Nepal and seeing all of the wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous images of the goddess, some of them are quite intense. Some of them, in fact, some of the images of Kali involve her, standing on a corpse or drinking blood out of a chalice or even out of a decapitated head. And now, when I interact with these images, well, let's put it this way. I can understand why a Westerner encountering these images might feel that the image is extreme. But I was trying to pinpoint what exactly the feeling that arises in me when I encounter these images, because in some sense, it's not fear for me. It's almost a sense of urgency, right? Kali represents that version of the goddess that is trying to yank us out of harm's way, right? In some sense, she's trying to rid me of my impatience and my misunderstanding and my stubbornness, and even of those instincts in me that would harm others, right? She's trying to get that out of there. Cut that out, Jessica, she's saying. So for me, when I see those images, I'm almost filled with a sense of urgency to get rid of my own bad habits and ignorant habits, right? So with that intense, let's call it intense, that intense imagery is something that kind of yanks me out of my pacification, of my lulled sense of just sort of day in, day out. I get that sense of like, oh, I should get up and practice. I should get up and do something, right? So I've noticed that ever since I've been vegan, more than 17 years now, I've noticed that sometimes people will ask really extreme questions in order to kind of get me to admit something about myself, right? So one of those questions that comes to mind now is, well, if you were stuck on a deserted island and there was only chicken to eat, what would you do? Would you eat the chicken or not? And, the way that these questions are posed, it's often an attempt to sort of catch me in my hypocrisy, I suppose, right? And so these extreme examples are meant to sort of force you into admitting something, right? But that's not necessarily the case. In fact, that's not the only circumstance um, in which we're sort of asked to test our ethical principles. In fact, all of ethical philosophy, both Eastern and Western, are filled with sort of extreme examples. What would you do in this scenario? And unlike the deserted island question, the question isn't really meant to corner you and call you out for your hypocrisy. Instead, when it's in the context of a philosophical class or a discussion or a parable, it's meant for us to get more inquisitive, right? So to use a Western example that probably many of us are familiar with is the trolley problem. This is a classical problem in ethical moral philosophy, where if you have a trolley headed down a rail and it's about to hit 5 people, but you have the opportunity to flip a switch and make it go and divert the trolley, but there is a person that you're going to hit if you divert the trolley. Now, there isn't meant to be like one correct answer, right? The question, what's more interesting is to use the question to process your own ethical and moral beliefs, right? To think through the not only the what would you do, but the why. And what are the variables or what are the circumstances that would lead you to change your action in that scenario? And not only to think through it for yourself, but then also, like, the interesting thing is to discuss it with others, to see how each person is thinking through the problem in a different way. Not so that we can necessarily come to the objective right answer, but so that you are developing your own sense of integrity, morality, so that you know what you would do given the situation, right? And where the foundation for that is really. And you know, actually the Eastern philosophy is also filled with these sort of beautifully extreme examples. One example that I was reminded of recently is there's stories of before Siddhartha Gautama was the Buddha. So in a previous life to becoming the Buddha, he was a prince, and this prince comes across a starving tiger and her cubs, and the prince is so worried that the tiger will eat her cubs out of starvation that the prince offers his own body, his own life, to the tiger mother. And there's different versions of the story. One, he leaps off a cliff, dives off the cliff into the tiger's mouth. Another one where he literally cuts his own flesh off to offer to the tiger. And again, sort of listening to that, it might seem extreme to listen to that parable. And also, kindness and compassion and the will to care for others does take some sort of sacrifice. So the question becomes, what am I willing to do for the sake of others? What am I willing to sacrifice and to give of myself? I mean, it would be very difficult for me to cut off my own flesh and offer it to another being, but what would I be willing to do? I think sometimes social media gives us these really quaint sounding quotes. For example, kindness is free, or kindness costs nothing to be kind. That actually drives me crazy. And maybe what they're saying is that it costs nothing to be polite. You can be polite without sacrificing anything. just politeness. But to be kind, I would argue, actually does require some sort of energy, some sort of effort, some sort of a sacrifice of our time, of our resources, of our energy, right? I have to sort of make time to go pick someone up at the hospital. I have to sort of like be willing to loan out my tools to my neighbors. I have to sort of be willing to maybe give something up. In my case, I try increasingly to challenge myself to give up sort of more plastic use, to give up more consumption, just buying things, right? To give up more energy use, right? Just to try to reduce what it is that I think that I need in order to get by. And some people would say that being vegan is that, right? Giving up animal products. And maybe I used to see it that way, but I don't really see it that way anymore. I see it as a sort of more of an affirmation. Like, I don't see it as a hardship to give up animal products. In fact, even when I'm dining with someone and someone says, like, we're looking through the menu for like what I'm gonna order, and someone will say, "Oh, right, you can't eat feta, right? You can't eat this." And I sort of like, even that phrase, I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to. It's not that I can't. It's that I don't choose to. I don't want to. I don't feel it necessary to. But anyway, that's just my own sort of personal editorializing, I suppose. Anyway, if you stick around, I'll show you the chords that I was using for the chant. Jema, Jema, Jagatambe ma, Jema, 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 Jagatambe ma, Jema, Jagatambe ma, Jema, Jagatam